We also want to recognize Jameson Lopp. Jameson, how's it going? Welcome to the chat.
Hey.
Hey.
Jameson.
It's a busy day. I think this is like the 5th live stream I've been on.
Excellent. So, just keep touring around, but staying home.
Night.
Yeah.
It's going to turn into drinks with 2-Bit Idiot eventually.
All right. Nice. And
Jameson, why do you need to wait? You can start drinking right now.
Oh, yeah. We're ahead of you on the drinking. We're working on it here.
The sad part is I've still got to do work during the day. I've got actual business to attend to. You know, Bitcoin doesn't give me a break.
Well, Jameson, we were just showing your tweet when you found this message in the last block signed. What did it feel like when you found that? What do you think about this message you found in the block?
Yeah, so I can't take full credit for it because at the time I was actually live streaming with Wang Chun of F2 Pool. So, you know, he or his pool, you know, a hasher at his pool mined that block, and he was like, "Hey, check this out!" And I was like, "Oh snap! I got to get that out on the Bitcoin Twitter."
Very
so
cool.
It's F2 pool, not AMP pool.
This is the block before, right?
Oh, it's the block before.
What's going on?
Yeah, 9999. You know, it's the last block with the 12.5 Bitcoin as a subsidy. So, you know, you could argue about whether or not, you know, in which interval does the halving actually happen.
But people thought
that was the final one with that large.
People thought
subsidy.
that was good though, right? Because the quote was in block 0, which wasn't a real block, and this block was in kind of the one before the new period. So that's like a good place for it.
Very cool. Do we know if they put anything in any of the other blocks?
So Obi, you were talking about I guess volatility, difficult for regular people to invest in Bitcoin because it's so volatile. I think that there might be a place for a deleveraged Bitcoin. So there's because it's difficult now with the interest rates being what they are, but there are things like structured products where you get a capital guarantee. So people will make like a product that lasts for 5 years. They'll take 90% of the money and put it into some kind of low risk interest bearing thing that rebuilds the money, and then they'll take the 10% and put it in something risky like derivatives or what have you. And in a Bitcoin version of this, the 10% could go in Bitcoin, and the 90% could be in some kind of bond that's relatively low risk that rebuilds your capital. Then you can say to people, look, you know, but if you buy this, the worst that can happen is you get your money back. And if it falls 80%, you know, you'll be in the first year, you'll be down what, like 4% or something. You know, I mean, it won't be very much because of the percentages, right? So I think something like that is makes sense for people, and you see the professional investors like this Paul Tudor Jones guy. I haven't heard of him before, but apparently he's famous. Big fund manager, and you know he's doing capital allocation, right? So he put 2% of his funds into Bitcoin, and you introduce retail investors to Bitcoin, and they go like, "Oh yeah, I'll buy 50% of it or something." Well, of course that's risky, right? But that's because you know when people say, "Oh, you shouldn't put more than some percentage," people don't understand allocation and risk management, I think is the point. So these kind of structured products or capital assured products are an interesting way to package something that's risky and still hold on to some of the return, but like a lower portion of it.
Obi, I think, oh, you're unmuted. There you go. Sorry, go ahead, Obi.
No, just when I don't know, it seems whenever Adam talks, my internet connection goes, which is very frustrating, but it's definitely on my side. But yeah, I think there's a place for structured products like that. But I do feel that we're still really early, and I still need to explain to people why Bitcoin, not shitcoin, for example. And so that's the stage I'm at, and I'm trying to solve that problem. before getting onto the structured products. But eventually, we definitely want to get there.
Did you see Bitfinex's new product, which is a Bitcoin dominance unit or something?
Yeah.
So maybe you could stick into your structured product a short, altcoin short plus Bitcoin just to juice it up.
You could. I suppose it's like there's a percentage of the there's a process that people go through, and if you've been in the market for 4 years plus or 5 years plus, you want more and more sophisticated products. But the 90% who, or 95 or 99% who haven't yet touched the market, they still need to understand literally the basic concepts of why this is such a disruptive innovation. And once they understand that, then they will go through this process. I don't know if that's the view I have, but what is your view? You think that for someone who's coming in new, it's better to give them something like that, or is that something that comes down the line after they've understood the sort of basics?
I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking. Well, it was just the observation was triggered by the way that CNBC Fast Money or some of these programs, like financial news programs, cover Bitcoin. You know, the price is up a bit, they'll get excited. The price is down, and they will, oh, Bitcoin's dead. You know, it's 80% down, etc. And you know, it will just have been, you know, 6 months ago or a year ago, and they would have had somebody on saying you shouldn't put more than 5% into it, you shouldn't put more than you could afford to lose. And those two claims are inconsistent, right? If you put the 5% into it and it's 80% down, you are now 4% down on your capital allocation. So they're presenting an imbalanced summary. And then I guess people who don't have that much investment experience don't understand that you can have something with a high return possibility, but quite a lot of risk and volatility, and what a Sharpe ratio is. So they're not going to know how to handle that. Where, you know, the sensible thing to do would be to balance things a bit so that you don't get wrecked, or you don't need, if you need short-term access to capital, that you don't have to sell Bitcoin when it's significantly down, because you've got funds that you can access at different time horizons or something.
Yeah,
So,
I think
people don't get it. So I don't know. Like
we spent like three or 4 years trying to deal with how to deal with the concerns around volatility. I mean, our first attempt was physically delivered futures, which we launched, and the original idea around that was like how this could potentially bring in these influxes of capital of institutional capital in the market, and that will slow down the volatility in the market. The next idea is effectively, like, we're not the first to do this, but follow the sort of in the paths of many others and try and offer like dollar cost averaging, auto buying, regular buying, because if most people are hodling, it reduces the level of volatility. Another option would be something like you're suggesting, where you have basically financial products that you set up, which mean that the volatility is not such a big issue. I still don't know which one it is, but I guess it's one of these things where you have to try multiple options, and for different people, they are interested in different things. But I think ultimately the most important is education. The biggest problem behind all of this is that people have been educated to not really spend any time understanding money themselves, and the only lesson they have is just trust someone else to handle the money for you. And that's where, and so therefore you can have these things like CNBC where they say these incongruent or inconsistent claims, and people haven't been given the sort of faculties or skills or tools to be able to work out, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. There's a way around dealing with volatility by managing my sort of exposure to it. It's sort of weird, given how important money is, that we don't teach basic concepts about money and economics in
Obi.
school.
Obi.
We don't teach basic financial responsibility either. So
Yeah. There must be a reason why.
But they do.
Consume.
Yeah.
It's almost as if somebody makes money from you not knowing anything about money.
Well, I wonder if the COVID situation and the economic effects, all the money printing, unemployment, and problems that will come from that will shift people's time preference.
Absolutely.
You know, like
Absolutely.
away from short-term consumerism into more hard assets and longer-term thinking.
Absolutely. New coronavirus, I mean, it's called coronavirus, which is, I mean, I've had this view that we're going to, if you look at sort of Thomas Piketty, wealth in the 21st century, Bitcoin standard, so on, the biggest effects on the economy or the gap between privilege and underprivilege have always happened in wars. And I was, so unfortunately, my fear was that the only way we could resolve some of the issues we have in the world, or at least reduce them, is a world war. Then coronavirus comes along, and it's a horrible disease, etc., or illness, but it is effectively a world war where the world is fighting against this alien virus. It looks like an alien sort of, and its name means corona, which suggests the sort of corona of a nuclear bomb, and so we have this sort of viral nuclear war happening. But the coronavirus is actually just the original bomb. But then you have money printing and widespread remote working are the fallout. And these will lead to sort of societal changes where, you have people saying, okay, Zillow, Google, Facebook are all saying that we're not returning to work for a year. Well, their employees are going to get used to the concept of remote working. They're going to get used to the concept of interacting with people at a distance. At that point, if I want to transact with them, trade with them, and so on, I'm going to want to use things like digital money. And also when I'm employing people, it no longer matters where that person is. There's no longer an advantage for being 100 meters away or 10,000 miles away. It makes no difference. I just want the best person wherever they are in the world. So the opportunities for meritocratic governance, the opportunities for whoever is the best gets employed are incredible. And the disadvantages of having to deal with taking your kids to school or so on are reduced. So the potential for this is amazing, and it will lead to people trying to understand money more. They'll have to be more self-sufficient. This is the hope. It may not happen. We may end up going back into work and forgetting this era, but if there is even a 10 or 20% change, that's going to be...
What happened in France years ago when I was younger is we used to have a year minimum and civic education, 14 years old to 15, I think, or 16, and then a year of economy. They scribed them both. And I remember this economy teacher used to say, guys, you're the first generation, you are going to work all your life to pay the pension for the others, and you will never see it yourself. And they scrapped those years. They were very enlightening. They were very eye-opening. So I would agree that the education is what is needed about finance, about basic finance, because everything is taken for granted, and only those that are actually doing their own research actually learn. But when I look at the number of people over the years that I try to talk to, try to explain things, not many people get interested. They just you just. I think, I don't know. There is a barrier that people just don't have time, or don't care, or don't realize that this is a game changer. And I guess you have to wait for the masses to and the only thing we need is time. But it's yeah, go for it.
No, I think a lot of people get into Bitcoin because they've normally experienced some kind of crisis that's forced them to learn about it. So, I mean, certainly in my journey, it was, I had my own business that I started in the financial crisis, and it was going through that process and not being able to get any money from the banks when I'd never had a problem before, that really made me learn about it. And then in the process of trying to convince others, I often found it was other people who'd been through some kind of crisis, or it's like an existential crisis. It kind of really changes. You come up against a barrier that you've never had to deal with before, and it's in the process of trying to overcome that barrier that you learn a different way. And I think it's interesting because it's almost as though, those people who've been through these crises, their personalities are hardened. And these are the people who are getting into Bitcoin first, who will ultimately be the new leaders. And isn't it interesting that they've had that journey in order to learn what the problems are, in order to know what the solutions are in the future? I find that really fascinating.
Well, if that's the case, there's going to be a lot of people going through financial crises over the next year.
Absolutely. And a lot of people have said it's not the pin that's pricked the bubble, it's like a sledgehammer, and because it's like all at once, up until now, everyone's had a gradual opportunity to figure it out. And now they have no choice, it's going to hit them all at once.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite quote from Satoshi's is, if you don't believe it or not, or don't get if you don't believe it or don't get it, I don't have the time to convince you. Sorry. And what's so cool about that saying is because he said that, or she, but everyone else who's a Bitcoiner has taken their time to try and explain it to everyone as much as physically possible. So Satoshi, he passed on the baton, and I think you're right. The people that have come up against a crisis, that have had especially people that have had their funds, taken by, or frozen by the government. In fact, a really classic example is the guy that there was a guy on Twitter that used to moan about Bitcoin all the time, and then eventually, the last time I heard of him, he was having his assets seized by the government for some reason, and it was like an aha movement. So hopefully that converted him. But the crisis has definitely got people into a kind of survival mode, I think, and maybe we'll see a lot less consumerism and reusing items rather than just sort of throwing them away and going back out.
Yeah.
Hey, Crypto Raptor, can I give you a shout out for this background that you have over there?
Yes.
Good to see you, bro.
Is that the background, or is that really there?
Well, actually, it's not really there yet because it's still not on my wall. But I
God damn it, Raptor!
I know, it's so bad. A long story.
Put it there. Hey, do you guys mind if I share something that is a little counterintuitive to most? Because as an artist, we're the bunch who are usually considered as the poor folk and those who die without ears and shoot ourselves because we get desperate over money, and then once we're dead, then our creativity gets monetized and everyone makes $100 million and gets to be a Gucci bag or something like that. But what's really going on in the crypto art scene is something that is in the history of art entirely and utterly unprecedented. Because you have, let's say you have zero artists who are pro Wall Street, not one. There's not, if one wanted to be one, I think they would be ousted, and all the other artists would hire other people to try and assassinate that person. But also at the same time, you don't have any artists who are anti-crypto. They're all pro-crypto. They're all pro-Bitcoin. And from that point of view, we have a long tradition of thinking that artists are in a certain way, but there's an avalanche of artists right now who are speaking on behalf of this movement, and that's incredible. That's such a resource of what could be thought, and I hope not to cheapen the concept, but they could be thought of as the highest PR for this whole thing that there is. Artists are never of the same opinion about anything, and they're highly opinionated and very difficult to deal with. And all of a sudden, you have a monetary revolution that is backed by an avalanche of artists, and the majority of them are not being utilized, not for business, not for their assets, not for their creative output, and a bunch of other things. And I think this is a little bit of a miss, and a bit of a personal mission of mine. And I get to, in a couple of days, I've had a few vodkas now, and I hope to recover before it happens in 3 days. obviously will. But there's a telecom company that has about $110 million revenue and 4 million subscribers. And I get to start educating their management level people about creativity. And that's been my journey of 20 years of doing this thing and helping people communicate their most essential message if I think that their message is actually something worth communicating about. And that's the kind of thing. And I'm not just plugging myself. I'm saying that there's a bunch of really cool people in this space who are doing incredible things, who would love to align with other people who are doing incredible things here, who just like to contribute. And some of them cost pennies right now to be involved with something. So that's my little contribution to this idea that you have an untapped resource of incredible magnitude here in the space now.
All right, let's go to Katie. I saw you trying to get in there. Katie, something to say? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the need for Bitcoin for some people. Like most of the people my age in the United States have been safe their whole life. Like there wasn't a major event that they recognized as like our monetary system is broken. I'm coming from completely different background. When I was 3, like our currency denominated, and then since then, our currency went like 900x compared to USD. So like it was 6 rubles per dollar, and now it's 74. Yeah, it's more than that. So like I could totally see what's going on, and from my perspective, like it was much easier to understand why we need to Bitcoin. And like over the last week alone, I onboarded 3 Russian girls to start DCAing Bitcoin. They all live in the United States now, but somehow it's just so much easier to explain Bitcoin to somebody who's been fucked by the system. So people who don't want to get it just yet, they will have to get it once they get fucked, unfortunately.
Looks like we're definitely Chris Ellis, something to say? Been quiet for a while.
I know. I've just been listening and checking out Twitter, looking at all the people. I agree with the last speaker, was it Victoria? I think that the people that are going to benefit from the most are the people that are actually in developing countries. And I think that's been said a lot for anybody who's new to the space, but Andreas Antonopoulos was saying this back in 2014. I think that's absolutely true. There was somebody who commented much earlier in the show that, you know, we might have to choose in the future which world reserve currency we're going to have, as US dollars or rubles. But I was going to add that actually, if you go to Moscow on a flight and try to get a taxi, you'll actually learn quite quickly that a lot of Russians don't even want rubles, let alone the rest of the world. Right. So I think at the moment that like the flight currencies in Forex, like you have the US dollar and you also have the Japanese yen. I think those are the 2 kind of safe haven trades in terms of national currencies that are backed by governments, and they're ultimately backed because there is a trust that because you know, the US might have 300 million odd taxpayers, the idea is that because that many people require possession of US dollars in order to pay their taxes, that therefore there will always be a future demand. And that is largely enforced by the threat of violence. If you don't pay your taxes, we're going to put you in a cage, and therefore you are incentivized to pay those taxes. And that's why I think a lot of speculators on the Forex market believe that these national currencies actually have value.
How does that work in countries with hyperinflation and paying taxes? Does that argument? I've heard that argument many times, and I'm not sure how.
So MMT. I'm not an economist and I'm not qualified in anything, but my basic noob understanding of MMT, modern monetary theory, is that it does require good policy making on the part of the politicians. I do think a lot of MMT advocates that I've listened to do agree and admit that inflation is a possible consequence of MMT. But they say that if you have correct policy decisions, that shouldn't happen because the taxation should destroy the money that is in excess supply. So you can print the money now, you've got future generations that can pay off the debt. It's not like a finite, person gets old, can't work anymore, can't pay off their debts. A country is unique in the sense that it has new, fresh blood that comes into it every single day and new taxpayers, therefore. And the idea is that you give yourself the money now, because if you're constrained by a deflationary asset like gold or like a hard asset, then you can't necessarily have all the nice things. You can't have Amazon, and you can't have on-demand anything you want, frappuccino lattes and everything else, right? If you want all these nice buildings and these skyscrapers, you need to be able to give yourself an upfront payment. But of course, that comes at the expense of something. And like that's why I got into Bitcoin, because ultimately I saw that this was just largely an institutionalized Ponzi scheme. You can't just keep printing to the point of infinity. Like there has to be some kind of ratio. There has to be some kind of balance. And I recognize, I think like everybody on this channel recognizes that we haven't really got that balance. And largely they're martingale. You know, from gambling, there's a strategy, there's a flawed strategy called the martingale strategy, where as you keep going, you keep losing your bets, you keep doubling your bankroll each time to recover the losses from all the previous debts. Because that relies on you having an infinite bankroll.
That's going to work. I just need to keep betting. I just need a bigger roll.
That's what the European
bigger.
Union's going to do. That's what Merkel's going to do. They're going to keep doubling down on this shit until they can't go anymore. Because, you know, once your career's over as a politician, what's the point in saving your reputation? You've got no future anyway. You may as well just destroy it and just go for this like full nuclear self-sabotage option.
You mentioned that probably the developing countries are going to be benefiting the most. But like if you look at the distribution of current Bitcoin education, it's pretty much all in English. I had real trouble to find any good information, any good sources in other languages. And do you think that's going to affect the distribution much?
Yeah, but you know, it's up to you, right? Like it's up to everybody. Like Bitcoin doesn't have a central planning committee. It doesn't have a marketing team. It doesn't have a business team. That's great, because I've worked in startups. They're an absolute fucking mess. And you know, if you've ever worked in a startup, even a successful one, you'll know how political things get, how the lobbying behavior happens. Everyone's got their agenda. In Bitcoin, everybody's in charge. Like my girlfriend Janine, she's done a lot of translation work. She's tried to get other people to do translation work. It has to be up to individuals to do that. Like if you want to disseminate this information, then you have to translate that information into your local languages.
That's an interesting thing that I've seen happen, though. I've had people reach out to me and basically ask permission to translate various articles that I've written. And I'm like, this is great. And by the way, you don't need my permission. I want you to steal everything.
Exactly.
Translate it into every language you can.
Yeah. You put a Creative Commons license on your work and then it's free to go, right?
We also want to welcome Will Pangman. How's it going? Say hello, Will.
Going great. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Great to be here with everybody on such an awesome day. It's my third halving, I guess. The first one was spent learning about Bitcoin. That was the week I kind of really started learning about Bitcoin, was the first halving. So it's always, I mean, it's special for everybody. It's kind of like, feels like New Year's, I kind of think, for everybody. But that's what I remember about past halvings.
Very cool. Good to have you with us, Will. And Rianne was here, but she's gone. Go ahead, Katie.
I think the halving 2028 actually going to be very close to the new year. Somewhere around that would be cool if it kind of aligned.
Yeah, I saw in the chat they're already beginning the countdown to the next halving. Just 4 more years. Start your clocks already, right?
It's like 1,400 some days, right?
Just start counting them down. Yeah.
So right now it's like March 22nd of 2024.
We can get that faster. We can put some more miners on it. Let's get on that. Yeah.
It's totally wild guess at this point.
I'm on guard. Standing guard. I'm standing guard.
All right, so let's check in on the. Go ahead.
The last halving was like 7 months early. This halving was about 2 months early. So, you know, we're probably not going to see any insane advances in ASIC technology. So, probably safe, you know, bet that it'll be a few months earlier. So, yeah, you know, sometime around New Year's.
sometime around New Year's 2024. Not that long away. We're looking at the price of Bitcoin. It's $8,671. Looks like it did go down a little bit below the halving, maybe touching as low as 8,350 or 8,200 if you got that green spike there. It's about the same. $1 for 11,531 Satoshis. Still got 158 people joining us in the chat. Thanks to everybody for giving us a thumbs up and a share. It's also a great time to subscribe down below. Hit the bell for notifications. We do shows like this almost every day, sometimes every day. You could also check out the World Crypto Network store at worldcryptonetwork.store. We've got the brand new World Crypto Network mug, our new t-shirt, Treasures Don't Float. Very popular idea. I think a lot of us have been involved in these boating accidents, horrible loss of keys, and we're just disappointed to find out that treasures don't float. We also have the WCN mug with both logos and the WCN t-shirt with the logo, the treasure shirt, and check out Davi Barker and Bitcoin Not Bombs, the brand new 2020 Bitcoin Halving Bitcoin Not Bombs edition t-shirt. You can get it at worldcryptonetwork.store. So there you go. There's our promotions for the day.
I've got a question.
Right.
At what point does Bitcoin become too private, that it becomes a threat to governments?
Good question.
Can you repeat it?
Question was, at which point does Bitcoin become too private that it becomes a threat to governments?
Next year.
Will governments actually continue to exist?
Unfortunately.
I think as long as human beings take up physical space, and governments will exist, because so maybe in our minds we'll spend a lot of our time in a virtual world, but in the physical world, we take up physical space. That means we take up land, and that means it's possible to have some level of physical control over land.
Yeah, it's
the government or the world.
It's the physical state of our bodies that is so difficult to defend, right? So, if you want to get into transhumanism, that's why I think, philosophical arguments aside about what you are and what is consciousness, being able to digitize yourself would mean potentially that then you could leverage the asymmetric defense capabilities that cryptography gives us. And that would be pretty awesome.
That's true, but I think governments have kind of grown exponentially because part of their role is making rules for all of us, but a lot of rules are now being delegated to software. So, they may still exist, but possibly a lot smaller than they are right now.
Saint Simone said
in the 1800s, soon the art of governing men will be at an end, and it will be replaced by a new art, the art of administration.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys talking about. They don't exist in my world.
I think
I like that answer.
The idea that for quite a while people have understood that governing people, that's not the answer. For there to be artistry in the way in which things are administered, such as money, that would be better.
I think to reduce the control that whoever governments have over you, you have to sort of reduce your need to interact with the physical world. So that's why I think you're seeing these movements towards van life, minimalism, and all of these things, intermittent fasting, because what they effectively do is they reduce your footprint. There's less things that you need. If you own your own house, if your house is mobile, if you are being very efficient in what you eat and so on, then there's less things that can be governed around you. As Jameson said, in the virtual world, in the digital world, all bets are off. The only risk there is that the internet itself at a foundational level is not very decentralized right now. There are the DNS system is managed, you know, and the IP routing system is managed. The big IP is managed by only a very few countries and very few organizations. But there's blockstream satellites, and in conjunction mesh networks. That's the one thing we need to do to make sure that the internet stays completely decentralized, decentralizing the on and off ramps.
That's why I'm so loudly advocating for the flag theory, because you're pretty much decentralizing yourself. You're like getting a bunch of passports from different countries and trying to figure out the attack factor, and just use the one that has no problem with the government that you're interacting with right now. And I consider it as like decentralizing yourself by limiting your dependency on any one particular state. You just like planting your flags in different jurisdictions, and it's kind of helpful.
Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for us because our faces are known. People know we're interested in Bitcoin, but the best defense is obscurity. Like, if nobody knows you own Bitcoin, if the Bitcoins you do own are disassociated from your banking records, if they're held somehow bought for cash or in a private way, and you're just generally obscure and low profile, then you can have pretty good time of things and be largely unaffected by governments. Moving around globally is a lot easier than it used to be, COVID aside. So I think the influence or relevance of governments is shrinking over time. We don't see it because it's slow. Even if you go back 50 years or 100 years, very few people had left their town or their country. And nowadays, it's relatively cheap to, rent an Airbnb in another country, go somewhere low cost, and just generally move around the world. COVID is putting a crimp in that, obviously, but presumably that's a short-term thing. So, and I think there's people have read the book Snow Crash, but it's a book I like a lot. And
Snow Crash.
The protagonist is kind of well-known, maybe wealthy in cyberspace, but poor in the real physical world somehow. And there's this great line in it where they bump into this guy. Oh, he's got the book. There we go. They bump into this guy and they have no idea who he is or why he thinks he's relevant. And he has to explain himself that he's the president of the United States. And they go, oh well, like they don't seem very interested. So the government still exists, but people are barely aware of it, and it has very little relevance in their lives or in everything is so, free market, capitalist, opt-in services for everything, that government has little relevance. So I view that as a blueprint for the future. So Bitcoin is an opportunity to build a Snow Crash future in stages.
How much do you think that things like Snow Crash and Neuromancer were influences on you with Hashcash and at the time?
Well, I was interested in capitalism, free market stuff, and I thought Snow Crash was great. I read that later. I was just very interested in privacy tech and then electronic cash. And people were interested to build electronic cash because it was clear that other internet privacy technology wouldn't be fully useful without it. So it'll be interesting to see what transpires, because people didn't predict the influence of the internet in society and in the way we interact, and social media changing the balance of power for publishing, and full of influence of hierarchical media organizations. So it gets to be seen what free market money does. It's 11 years, but give it another. Let's see where we are at the 20-year mark. The world might look quite different.
And going back to
I
the
wouldn't take the opposite side of that bet anyway.
going back to the original question, what Kay was saying, if it was maybe the privacy that would make the governments turn on Bitcoin, the Plan B guy in a recent article, he said if Bitcoin went to 288,000, he would get out immediately because he believes the governments would be interested not because of the privacy, but because it's worth so much money. Similar to the gold seizure in the 1930s, there might be a Bitcoin seizure. What do you guys think of that? Not everybody at once, but at least one person.
Yeah.
Okay,
sorry,
Victoria, go ahead.
I was just going to say unconfiscatable. That's tone racist.
What do you think, Victoria? Is it just the value of the money, or is it about it being secret?
I think what's really interesting is that in England anyway, HMRC are now requiring you to declare your Bitcoin holdings because you have to work out in quite a complicated way what your profit is. And the only way you can work it out is by declaring how much Bitcoin you have. So it kind of puts you in a double bind. You know, you can kind of play by the rules and declare what it is in order to work out what your tax liability is. But in the process, you're having to admit how much Bitcoin you hold. Whereas conversely, if you don't admit it, but then it's discovered later in time that you've been holding more Bitcoin for longer, they can get you on the fact that you didn't declare it originally.
It's a reporting requirement. It's a reporting requirement.
Exactly, but they can't, you know, with these things, they get you on the fact that you didn't report it originally. So the crime isn't necessarily that you had it. It's when you come to want to spend it or cash it in the future, they kind of go, oh, hang on a minute, you didn't tell us you had that. And also they want you to declare what all your Bitcoin addresses are. So, you know, and it's very stealthy because, you know, it starts slow and they rely on the population being honest in order for the whole system to work. I mean, if all of the Bitcoin holders said, I'm not telling you what it is, and that's fine until you want to cash it in, and then you're in trouble because it's like, well, hang on, where did all that money come from? Or if you want to buy a house with your Bitcoin, for example, you know, even if you want to buy a house, you have to declare where your deposit came from now. You never used to have to do that. You know, and if your deposit comes from crypto, a lot of the banks won't give you a mortgage. So, you know, so they're very stealthily, they're creating obstacles in your path. So it's not that, you know, they can confiscate it because they can't, but they can make life very difficult for you in the process. And so
that's a smart move. That's a smart move on their part. That's exactly what I would do if I was an evil dictator. I wouldn't stop you from owning it because that's a fool's errand. Like, you could all have Veracrypt hidden volumes with plausible deniability, secret keys with derivation paths, or you crafty rascals. And I don't have enough MI5 agents or enough, you know, CIA operatives that can go out and rubber hose you all for your passwords. But what I could do is just turn around to the banks and turn around to every estate agent and say, you know, every time someone tries to buy a house, maybe dox the fuck out of them. Like, maybe just try to get every piece of personal identifiable information. And if they can't prove where their income came from, it's undocumented income. Hey, we could even seize those assets, right? And the banks have to comply. They must comply, because if they don't, then they lose their license to operate. They go out of business. So it's the perfect strategy, in my opinion. And I still don't think
they're not as stupid as we think they are.
This also.
What's your answer to that, though? Like,
this also,
unless you want to move to Vanuatu, where are you going to buy some land? Because in every country now, I think in Germany, any developed country, you have to tell them where your money came from before you buy it.
Yep.
Or you don't need to, or you just move away from the concept of coveting land. Because
so I liked what you were saying.
All disruptions come down to this desire for land. So we don't need land. We were originally nomadic in nature.
No, I liked what you were saying about van life. That's absolutely spot on. Yeah, I've been feeling that for a long time. No, that's totally true.
Remove your dependence on lands, because almost all government is based around the concept that people covet land. So if you
exactly
away, then that helps a lot. It still doesn't deal with everything, but it helps a lot. Reduce your footprint on the physical world.
Yeah, because the government can take back your land. I mean, they can confiscate it. So I think that's absolutely right. If you reduce your footprint, I think government authorities have always been fearful of people who live in the woods and the hills because they're difficult to track. And actually what's happening, a lot of African countries in the last 10 years have been following these updates. A lot of companies like Google and Microsoft have been going in and trying to document all the streets, trying to make sure every street has a name and make sure every person has a first name and a last name, so the message space is wider and each person can be individuated. And it's basically like, you know, European colonialism all over again. Our ideas of documenting everything, writing everything down. You know, you've got to be tracked, you've got to have a number. And it's just this obsession with formalization, because then the problem is that anyone who has that data has the control. You know, there are certain governments I won't name because I don't want to fall for that rule of the internet in the 20th century who would have loved this technology. They would have thought this was fantastic, that you could track everybody and have all these different, you know, graph theory and attach all these different data metrics. Which religion are they? Maybe you don't like this particular religion. How much money do they own? Where do they live? Perfect. But we've got to fight against that, guys. Like, we've got to support, you know, kind of like coin joins. We've got to support projects like this. We want to resist that.
Well, and going back to the
because at the end of the day, governments only survive because they have the support of their population, and the only reason they're supported by their population right now is because they're brainwashed by the media. You know,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you know, a crisis like this is just the perfect storm to wake people up. I mean, the number of people who've been at home for 6 weeks starting to get videos on the internet and books, and you know, starting to be exposed to ideas and also the inconsistencies. You know, I think a lot of people are going to start waking up pretty quickly. And as soon as you've got a critical mass that has completely lost faith in the government, you know, things can literally change overnight.
But that's being impeded all the time by like YouTube banning, you know, videos that contradict the WHO. And I think even someone said that the Cointelegraph, their show went offline for whatever reasons. So you've got all these, you know, these places, social media sites where you can disseminate information quickly, but it's the wrong information that's disseminating, because again, it's a kind of a funnel through a specific set of people that are deciding what should be shown and what shouldn't.
You've got to get on the Fediverse, man. I mean, you've got to keep every now and again, somebody like Zuckerberg comes along, they try to control the information, and they can build a dam and they can definitely control that information for a while. But eventually that information breaks out and it wants to be free. For now, YouTube is the biggest thing on the internet right now. Their metrics are going through the roof. But you don't want to allow them that dominance position, because they're a private company. They don't owe you shit. They don't have to comply with the Constitution. So they don't owe you any free speech. You've got to be decentralized. You've got to look at something like the Fediverse, where things are uploaded to BitTorrent and they're streamed over the web to torrent, torrent to web. And then you've got, well, you can cross-post all your videos. You can put stuff on YouTube if you still want those views and those recommendeds, but then you can also post onto other more decentralized platforms as well, and get other people to do it too.
And also, I think there are enough people now that people are telling their friends. So, you know, and when you've got people that you know personally going, here, you need to look at this. You know, you're not just relying on YouTube search algorithms. You're actually recommending stuff personally. That's really powerful.
I think about three is the right number of recommendations. If 3 people tell you to watch a show, or 3 people to tell you to watch a book, it's usually worth checking out. And if 3 people tell you about Bitcoin, well, you're lucky. I also wanted to go back, and I wanted to tell you guys a story about the British Museum. We'll go to Ben next. But as you were saying, the government wants to know all the Bitcoins that you own. In the same way, I read this story about the British Museum, and let's say that you were really clever back in the day and you took all your valuables and you buried them on your land in England. And later on, maybe not even your descendants, maybe somebody else owns the house and they dig up all those valuables. Well, the king still owns those valuables. Those valuables, if buried in the land, they assume that you were trying to dodge taxes and they will claim them back. They have a better system now. You might get a little cut. You might get some money. But initially, they would just take them. So just an interesting side story there I learned from the British Museum book. But let's go on. Ben, you had more to say?
Well, if you're interested in tax, going back to our friend who wrote Bitcoin, whatever the name of the book is, Dominic Frisby.
Bitcoin, the Future of Money.
Fantastic, the original Bitcoin Standard. If you read Tax, The Future of Tax by Dominic Frisby, that's really fascinating. It's all about the history of tax and how tax has evolved over time. As it's been harder and harder to claim tax from people, governments have had to come up with more and more innovative ways to try and get tax from people, which I think is important. You know, tax should be hard to claim, and because if tax is harder to get out of your citizens, then you usually end up with fairer tax systems where, you know, wealthier people pay more money, which is fairer. But it's interesting what you're saying about infecting people with the Bitcoin bug. It's almost like the COVID rate of infection. So I can't remember exactly what the number was, but I think that the reason in which that corona is dangerous is because it has a high rate of infection compared to something like influenza. And I think it's each person with COVID infects potentially in a normal scenario, without social distancing and quarantining, you would infect 3 people. I think it's 3 people. And then with a cold, I think you infect like 1.5. And then over time, like 10 series is in, that someone with COVID would have infected something like 59,000 people or something, whereas someone with a cold would infect something like 13 or 15 people. So that's why corona is so very dangerous. And that's why, in fact, as Bitcoiners, everyone should go out and preach the good word. But this all goes back to this Hegelian concept that people move towards liberty. And Bitcoin is something which has arrived because we need more liberty in the way in which we transact. And we can't get that liberty from fiat currency. We can't get that liberty from, you know, other forms of money. We need a decentralized money which is controlled through consensus and user consensus, and that can only be done through liberty. We were talking about YouTube before. Chris Ellis mentioned YouTube, and what was the name of the alternative to YouTube, Chris?
Well, Fediverse, yeah, this is a distributed group of like websites that support a more distributed model. And like there's Nvidius.us. I'll get the spelling in just a moment. And that actually allows you to stream YouTube videos without giving YouTube the traffic. You can just put any YouTube / after the / put watch and then the actual string, and you can watch it on Nvidius.us. So I've been doing that a lot recently. When I share YouTube videos now with friends, I don't send them the YouTube link anymore because I don't want the whole metadata going along with it and all the ads and everything. I just give them the Nvidius link, and it's the same as watching a YouTube video.
Yeah, man, fantastic. Like, why would you trust a private entity, private company to be careful with your data?
Yeah. Especially when they get big. I don't mind startups. I don't mind, like, you know, go-getters, like people that want to disrupt the system. But once you become entrenched like YouTube, you effectively do become a public commons, right? But even though they're a private company,
the public commons controlled by people, by the public, is, you know, is far different to something like YouTube. The reason in which YouTube is acting in the way in which it's acting is because it's financially better for them to act in that way because of crony capitalism. Because if they upset the governments for which they, you know, in which they operate in, like the US, for example, then they'll have to suffer for it, you know, financially. That's the way in which they act. That's the driver to all of their decision making. But it's not a public common. If it were a public common, then it would be more of a decentralized system, I think, which is, you know, what.
So the spelling, so just say, so I promise the spelling is INVIDIO.US. So yeah, check it out, and like check out the Fediverse. Like anyone who's watching, I think that it's high time now. YouTube is kind of peaking out now. Like YouTube, I've kind of had enough of it now. I think it's at its height. It's at the top peak of the market, but I think we need to start questioning, because I've had a lot of channels that I was following. There were decent channels that got blocked or banned or have videos taken off. There are just so many stories now, people of creators that have been burned because they've got advertisers. It's not just governments. You've got to remember that corporations are powerful too. And so YouTube now are trying to pander to the advertisers. They're putting more and more rules in. Some of those rules were obscure before. Now they've become a little bit clearer. But the fact that, you know, people have to dance to the tune of whatever, you know, whoever's paying them, I think it's time to start resisting that. And if you keep giving YouTube your traffic and you don't give it anywhere else. I think World Crypto Network should be cross-posted, and I think every episode should be on. Dude, we were doing that 4 years ago, putting World Crypto Network on BitTorrent, because then you give people a choice, and then you give people this option of like, you don't have to give YouTube and thereby Google and Alphabet your ad revenue, you know, all of this stream.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
right now
this
we're
is
on
the
Twitter
thing which
and
pushed us.
Facebook and YouTube, but those are all owned.
Oh my God, you got the
systems.
fangs? Wait, you're just streaming only through the top 5, 10.
I wish
No,
we
that's
were
not
on.
what
I
was
wish
talking
we were on
about.
Netflix.
That's not the kind of
Gosh,
distribution I
man.
was talking about.
Ha. Now we're on all the controlled platforms. But again, it's
my
you
God.
want viewers, and you're not PewDiePie. Remember the PewDiePie
No, wait,
story?
I'm not
PewDiePie
I'm not
moved to
saying-
D Live, and he lost 99% of his audience. 99%. So he had no choice to make an exclusive deal with YouTube and to go back
this
right back home.
conversation between-
So.
This conversation with Tom and I has been going on for 5 years, and I don't actually think that we ever really disagree. I think that the concept is there's nothing wrong with like transmitting on these platforms, the FANG platforms, but you want to move people away from that. Like the idea is that you can only really get that migration by promoting, by the way, we're also on this other thing, and then trying to get that traffic to move away. Nothing wrong with posting on one of the FANG networks. I'm just saying, don't allow them to get the monopoly and be the only place that people can go.
I think more and more like people will lean as we become more internet native because of the current crisis. Where we will understand why privacy is important. We will lean towards privacy enhancing technology. You know, like using Jitsi, for example, as opposed to Zoom. But then on the opposite side to that argument, you could say, well, because you have like a free and open source alternative like Jitsi, that will make Zoom become more accountable and better with people's privacy. Just like if you have something like Bitcoin, which is available for people to opt out to, then maybe the currency is controlled by governments. If people have this easy onboard opt out, will become a better money, and you know, will be less of the sort of privacy stealing currency in which we've kind of grown used to. So and that kind of goes along with the idea of the John Nash. You know, you have the ideal money, and then that encourages the less ideal money to be better. So I think having another option is a good idea, like you suggest.
Yeah, like the more distributed, like Victoria was saying about it earlier, I think that the problem is that people are too willing to give up control. Like when you vote and we talk about democracy, you're just outsourcing your decision making to a central policy tank, right? Like if you're in the UK, then you're outsourcing your decision making to Parliament, unless you have devolved power, like Scotland is trying to get independence. I support that. I think that power should be local, and people should be able to make decisions on their own local site, because they're the ones that are actually there up against the coalface, and they actually have the ability to see what's really going on. So I have to deal with some cats right now, but I'll devolve to anybody else who wants to rant, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, no, vote with your feet, man. Like, you know, if people out there, they want to encourage and foster privacy enhancing technologies, then, you know, use Bitcoin, use Jitsi, use free and open source software if you can, you know, run Linux. Just by running those pieces of software and then maybe giving feedback and maybe even contributing occasionally to their projects, like you can make a big difference.
Is there a concern though that to Chris's point, are a large percentage of people not willing to take control themselves?
People move humanity over time.
That's a fear of mine.
I mean, like, so, you know, you had slavery, you had feudalism, then you have democracy and capitalism and free markets. People over time move towards liberty. Humanity over time moves towards liberty. And I think it's the same with like technological solutions. You'll just move towards the solution which gives you the most liberty.
See, now I hate to disagree with BTC Socialist in the middle of a Keynesian economic disaster. But it does seem to me like what we're leaning towards more of is responsibility, where you need to be responsible not only for your viral safety now, which used to be the province of germaphobes, but you need to be responsible for your health, your food, your money, your basic things. And I think that we're going to see a clamoring for more things like basic income, universal health care. Certainly the rest of the world has it, but the backwards United States does not. And the government, the corporations, they have the money. It's a horrible thing to say. Again, it's redistribution. All the libertarians are up in arms, but we do it already to pay for the F-35. We do it already for the military. We spend all this money. Why don't we spend some of it on the people, make them secure so that they can make more money for the GDP? We all make money.
If you look at libertarian theory, some of the most right-wing people are also big advocates for guaranteed basic income, because true liberty is being able to be free to work on what you really want to do, not just doing it just to survive. You want to work on something because that's what you were designed to be on this earth to do, and you're going to be best at it. And if you have to figure out how I'm going to have a roof over my head and how I'm going to have food on the table, you cannot be working on the thing that you're best designed to do. So you then don't have true liberty. So actually, a lot of libertarians are big advocates for UBI as well.
The question of how do we, libertarianism up until Ayn Rand was a leftist tradition, but each their own ability, each their own need. Ideally, you work on the things in which you want to work on and you're good at and you can contribute best at. And then, each their own need, you get the full use of the system, which is what you have in free open source. You have, contribute where you can and then, make use of the full system. But how you structure a society which can produce enough for everyone to be able to live and survive and thrive, and have that, luxury of work on the shit you want to work on, that's dead complicated. And who knows if we'll get there, but hopefully